and thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Mario Toruno, and I am the VP of Digital Health Solutions and Strategy at Nolij. Today, the topic that we're going to be discussing is ransomware, and particularly the anatomy of it. This is being brought to you by both Nolij and Cygen Technologies. As we go through this discussion exploration of ransomware, I know questions will come up. As those questions come up, please go ahead and type them into the chat box on the bottom right of your Zoom control panel. My goal is going to be to add your value to the discussion. So as your questions come up, I will try to go ahead and interject your questions to add that value that I think we will bring to everyone. Also keep in mind at the end, we will have a question and answer session. And in that session, you can also ask questions. So in recent times and years, ransomware has become a pretty big topic. We've seen huge increase in attacks. But what is ransomware? So at the most basic level, ransomware is a malicious software that encrypts all of your system's data, and you will not be able to access it. You will not be able to manipulate it, and your precious and critical data will not be available to you. In essence, you have to pay a ransom, hence ransomware, to get access back to that data. Once you pay it, you get a key, you can decrypt your files, and you will have access once again. As I said earlier, we've seen a massive influx in ransomware attacks. According to SonicWall's 2021 report, attacks globally have risen by 62%. If we concentrate that to North America alone, it's over 150%. Here's a fun fact. Out of the top 10 countries experiencing attacks, the US had as much ransomware attacks as 9 other countries put together, and then multiply that by 4. That is how serious this problem is. From the FBI Internet Crimes Report, they received 2,500 ransomware complaints in 2020. That's a 20% increase from 2019. This year is yet to be seen. But keep in mind, that's just what's been reported, not what has occurred. So let's concentrate this to the topic of healthcare. How is this important to health systems? How is this important to health practitioners? How is this important to the patients and safeguarding their data and the providers providing the care? Let's talk about San Diego, California, a system called Scripps. Scripps Health experienced a ransomware attack and was out for several weeks. The cost of that attack in an August 2021 report was an estimated 113 million. Now, from loss of revenue perspective, they actually lost 91.6 million in revenue. To tie that all up, patient trust was lost, and now there's actually a class action lawsuit that was filed on June 7th of this year. Now let's talk about another one. This one's out of Mobile, Alabama. Unfortunately, this actually ended up in an infant's death. This system in 2019 is called Spring Hill Memorial Hospital. They experienced a ransomware attack that brought down every system they had, from the healthcare perspective, from the provider perspective. They were back to practicing health with paper. In this case, the baby was being born and unfortunately passed away months later. This was due because a lot of the vital signs that would be fed to these fetal monitors were not getting to the fetal monitors because the system was down. The baby was in distress. That was because of the ransomware attack they experienced. Now, again, trust was broken. The patient, unfortunately in this case, the baby passed away, and the mother, Toruno kid, has filed a lawsuit, arguing that the computer outage is what caused and what resulted in the baby's death. If this lawsuit is successful, it'll be the first claim in this manner, and from a legal perspective, will change the game. As we go through this discussion, I want you to think about those facts and think about those statistics. And I want you to continuously think how it impacts you as a patient, because our information is in those systems. And as a person in your daily lives, we use data all the time. So now, without further ado, let me now turn over to our wonderful panel. And today we bring to you a global panel of highly credible experts. I would first like to introduce Sean Corrigan. Welcome, Sean, to this webinar. Sean is the lead information analyst at Hope Health Services. He actually created and developed the company's security program from its inception. Sean also understood the human factor of training and implemented new hire and continuous education training around cyber as that program came online. He was key in implementing policies, procedures, security controls, and monitoring for the system. He comes with deep experience in vulnerability scanning, remediation, system hardening, as well as intrusion detection and response. Sean is also responsible for the in-house VPN and remote access design, where he designed, developed, and implemented this company-wide and system-wide through all its networks. Again, thank you, Sean, for being here. Sean, in helping the audience understand the importance to health systems, and more importantly, the health record systems that we're all responsible for as health IT practitioners, and systems are responsible for as custodians of the data. Can you talk to us about the current trends and a little on how Hope Health has tried to address the current landscape of attacks?
Sure, thank you. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Hope Healthcare is not exclusively unique, but it is a unique company in the fact that we also handle hospice. That is our main thing. So that adds a whole new level to some of the things we have to safeguard, because most attackers know, at least if they understand hospice, that once a patient passes, it could be 2 to 3 years before every agency out there knows that person passed away. So the level of identity theft as a potential is a humongous market and a humongous attack, which made us have to be a little bit more vigilant, I would say, than just a standard, healthcare where they're just dealing with in-house and out-house patients. Not necessarily out-house, that sounds a little weird, but I think you know what I mean. So in healthcare, one of the biggest problems that happens and you got to deal with is how extremely fast-paced it is. So many times with things going that fast, people tend to get a little careless, overlook some of the basics, in not hesitating for just that one moment to say, hey, should I take a pause on this? So that, makes it a little bit more difficult. And I think that's one of the things that attackers really look at, the fact of, in healthcare, you don't have a lot of time to make decisions. It could be life or death. So they're really counting on that factor. Similar to when people send out a phishing campaign, you want to scare the person to death on the other end so they don't even think, they just react. And that is one of the big reasons why I think healthcare is a target, is because people have to react in milliseconds and they don't take the time to settle down and look at things. Also with the healthcare industry, since it is changing so much and becoming a heck of a lot more mobile, where now we're going into patients' homes and we're going to different locations, satellite offices. It's not just a standard hospital setting anymore, which means instead of the normal endpoints, workstation servers that you're dealing with in-house, you've got things traveling all over the place. If you add on to that, you've got all the whole IoT of things, you've got testing equipment, video cameras, security systems, HVAC, the list goes on that healthcare has to deal with so many working parts. It's a very large footprint and attack vector for anybody on the outside trying to get in. So that's a very large reason for that problem. Also with the hospice side that we deal with, since we are so mobile going into other people's homes, you have people traveling all over with their equipment, doesn't come back into the office. So you don't have the hands-on to get into it, make sure it's updated. You're hoping to God all the policies you set properly with group policy or things like that are doing what they're supposed to. You got hotspots being used and everybody's different Wi-Fi's, open networks. So the importance of hardening your equipment becomes very, very important, where you're giving people and that user of that machine or any system you have the least amount of permissions possible to get their job done. It's a very fine line. It's a tightrope. There is always a lot of pushback, especially when you start marching up the chain where whoever has the most expensive seats, they really don't want to be locked out of anything. but it is a necessary evil to prevent the ransomware from coming in. No matter what you do with all those things, the one thing you always have to consider, and I always considered, is, and I hate to say it because people don't like hearing it, the end user is the weak link. It's just how it is. I wish it weren't that way. But in order for any security program to be successful, you've got to get buy-in, not only from upper management all the way up through, but you've got to get the staff on board and get some education in place. Because you can have all the greatest tools in the world, it still comes down to most likely an attacker is going to get in, not always, but most likely from an end user doing something and just opening the door for them. So you can have the best security system in your home, but if somebody just opens the door and lets the person walk in and rob you, all your security did nothing for you. You've got to get that education in place, which is very important, is getting them engaged. So that's one of the very big difficult things, is trying to get people engaged, try to get them to understand what's going on, how important it is, how risky it is, and then fighting the battle of protecting patient records. So
it's always easier to get people in. It's always easier to get people engaged after you've had an attack, right? Versus trying to do it beforehand.
Well, yeah, that's when everybody starts paying attention. But before, they kind of like, whatever, these guys are just crying wolf, until the day that you're not crying wolf. So we all pray to God that that day doesn't come. You know, you do your best to fight it. But, there's always been this fine line where if something does happen, does the patient need to know it happened, or do they not need to know it happens? I think a little bit of a stigma needs to somehow be removed from those things. Not that it makes it any better, but everybody needs to start to understand that no matter what you do, it's a possibility. You can try all you want to defend it, and hopefully you're successful with all the different things you put in place. You have a good chance of that, but it's a possibility. And companies are so afraid of what kind of PR is going to come out of if they say, hey, this has happened, that they try to keep things hidden or secretive. And I don't know if that's good or bad, but on a patient side, if somebody got my records, I would sure want to know about it. But legally right now, from what I understand, unless it's changed, unless 500 records or more can be proven that they've been taken out, you don't have to report it, which I don't know if that's good or bad. So there's a lot of working parts you got to worry about, along with those fine lines of who needs to know what and where. It's a difficult task.
Yeah, no, I resonate with all of it, right? And this is actually a good segue. So our next panelist is actually Tal Kollendar. Tal is the co-founder and CEO of Gytpol. Tal, thank you for joining us today from Israel.
Thank you for having
me. Good morning. Or good afternoon, which one it is.
Good 9 p.m. Yeah.
Good night. Good night. So Tal is a professional hacker since her teenage years, always on the hunt to crack open what seems impossible. Her military service began in the Israeli Air Force, and she wanted to be a fighter pilot, but they had a different plan for her. And sadly for the hackers worldwide, she was allocated to the Israeli Defense Force, the IT Corp Security Systems Division, where she served as the ICT specialist. Following Tal's Army service, she embarked on a professional career. Utilizing both her cyber and ICT background, she was actually assigned and led the team at Dell EMC, and as well as the Israeli Defense Ministry. So Tal, in hearing what Sean just talked about, especially IOMT and these things in health that are now becoming so connected. What is your perspective and thoughts as a former hacker, now turned defender, and take us a little bit through that journey of that?
Sure. So hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. One of the things that I think that is so important, I mean, and again, I want to connect it to the former topic. So users are the weakest, but a hacker cannot move from one computer to another, meaning doing lateral movement, without what we call an entry point, which are the endpoint, which is the endpoint, or the endpoint of each and every one of us. In fact, if I am going to connect the endpoint or the entry point to what happened recently in Israel, that one of the hospitals, one of the biggest hospitals in Israel got a ransom attack, and they just switched everything and just started writing in papers instead of their computers. So, and we have a solution, but the name of the solution is Gytpol, and I'm because I wanted to teach the market that in order to beat a hacker, you must think like one. And I went to this hospital. I think it was like 1.5 years ago, and I told them, take Gytpol. Then they said, we don't have money. I mean, this is a problem in every hospital. But after this event, we decided to kind of give a huge discount. Like we don't want to earn more money. We don't want to have a huge revenue, if any, on each and every hospital, because we know that we need to save people's life. And in order to see that misconfigurations basically leads to so many ransom attacks and attacks in today's world, and misconfigurations are mainly two things: human errors and default settings. And remember, guys, human errors, we do it all the time. Default settings, unfortunately, if you have the Microsoft world, wow, like it's an endless world. And therefore, companies, even companies like Checkpoint, like CyberArk, like, I mean, so many companies are a part of our customers because they see that there is no other tool that does what we do. And that is so impressive because once we have this stamp, we know that we can save anyone and everyone, and that is why we are growing so fast in of course mainly in the US market, but we have a statement that we need to help hospitals because we know that, and again I connect it to the former topic, that in order to you have so many tools, so many things in today's market, but you need to do two main things. You need a budget and you need manpower. If you don't have those, so yeah, so it's a waste of time. And don't ask yourself if you're going to have any attack. I mean, you need to ask yourself when you're going to have the next attack. I mean, that's the only thing. We want to keep your the people life, and we want to make sure that people are not suffering, and of course that, I mean, the most important let's say, or you know, we at the end of the day, hospitals, I mean, what they do is they save they save lives. So we want them to feel that we want to feel safe themselves. We don't want them to be afraid that every single day they might have like a potential attack. They might have like some total shutdown to their computers, and they will have in the middle of an important surgery just to shut down their computers. They need to do everything manually. So therefore, no more ransomware attacks on those, I mean, on the hospital sector, because I think it is the most important sector that we need, that we must save. And unfortunately, when we see that lack of knowledge or people or manpower and the budget, which I do feel that it is a shame. That is exactly what leads us to those attacks. So,
no, Tal, thank you for that insight. And with that, I think it's actually a great segue into Greg. Greg Scasny is our next panelist. Greg Scasny is actually the CTO at BlueShift Cybersecurity, and he's also the co-founder of Cygen Technology. His background includes a degree in electrical engineering and technology from Purdue University. He has 20 years experience in information and cybersecurity, including performing red team and adversary emulation exercises. Greg has designed effective cyber defense capabilities and security operations for multiple commercial and government entities. And Greg currently teaches cyber risk management, ICS/OT red team tactics, and ICS/OT blue team defense strategies at Kennedy Space Center for NASA. So Greg, in hearing what Tall's talking about with misconfigurations and hearing about her thoughts from the hacking perspective and how it's kind of leveraged, right? How does these blue team tactics and or red team tactics and blue team defense strategies, really come into play when it comes to ransomware? Especially now that we're seeing a very interesting thing turn, which is these things becoming a service, right? So ransomware as a service. So what are your thoughts around that?
So, and I agree with 100% what Tal said. So being next red teamer myself, understanding the vulnerabilities that you have, the attack surface, and misconfiguration is a great word, because a lot of times what happens, it's, when you leave like default settings in place, or you're not looking for misconfigurations, and people make mistakes. So what corporations need to understand is, when we hear a lot, so we're a dedicated, cyber defense organization, right? So we have an XDR, managed XDR platform. We have a SOC. We live, eat, and breathe only security. A lot of the customers we deal with, and especially on the medical side, they expect their IT people to be able to take care of the security part of that. And that's the first downfall that's going to happen from an attacker's point of view. When you talk about wanting to think like an attacker, and you really, really need to think like an attacker, you need to understand what their TTPs are, their tactics, techniques, and procedures are, because when you understand those from that high level, then you can put in defenses around that. But when you start looking at IT teams, one of the things we used to say all the time when doing red team operations was, as an attacker, I only have to be right once. And as a defender, you have to be right 100% of the time. Now, that's 100% true. And it's a little bit of a scare tactic from, red team guys, but it really is true. So when you think about defending teams or IT teams whose jobs are, you have a help desk, right? So you have to take care of issues like, hey, Billy can't print, Jimmy can't use Outlook, I don't, whatever, my computer crashed, I can't get to Facebook, whatever the day-to-day, whoever does IT help desk, I take my hat off to you, because it's the worst job in the world. And the next part of that, then you have to figure out, okay, well, what upgrades are we making? What kind of strategy we have around patching? What are we doing for this? All this stuff. And then in your spare time, go ahead and defend the network. And when you talk about a healthcare network, like Sean was speaking of, the amount of attack surface that you have, right? It's not just the fact that they move very, very fast. They also have a lot of stuff, a lot of infrastructure. So if your job is to take care of all that infrastructure, and my only job is to break in, there is no mathematical way it's possible that you're going to win that fight, ever. I don't care what technologies you have or whatever, someone's going to make a mistake. But in healthcare, and whether it's ransomware today or like we talked about years ago when ransomware first started, that, hey, they're going to start stealing data, and they're stealing medical data now. Their end game, that end part of the attack chain, the action on objectives, is for them to get paid. So right now it's easy because it's ransom, but it could easily be holding your stuff hostage, whatever the case would be. It may be something else tomorrow. Ransomware is it today, so we'll stick with that. But if businesses and mostly the executives of businesses think that they can put all their money into a 100% preventative strategy and win that war, they're going to lose that. That's a misnomer, right? You need to have preventative. Cyber's best done in layers, right? Especially cyber defense. What we focus on, and what I think is important, is what we call dwell time. Dwell time is the amount of time that it takes for that initial compromise. So that's on an endpoint, which 99% of the time it is. But don't you think for a second that if you have a vulnerable external service, like let's say Fortinet, right? I'm not picking out Fortinet. I think they make great products. But Fortinet had a huge vulnerability recently, right? Where all I had to do is send a single GET request with specially crafted GET request to that VPN server, and it would spit me back everybody who's logged in, their username, their password, and access level in plain text, right? That's bad.
Yeah,
things like that are going,
dream, right?
Well, exactly. And then you talk about things like proxy logon. So for those who don't know what proxy logon was, for people with on-site Exchange, Microsoft Exchange servers, again, sending a single post request to that Exchange server would allow me to then install a web shell, right? And then when no one knew it was going to happen, it was a 0 day. You can't prevent those type of things. They're going to happen. What you can do, if you have if you understand the TTPs of attackers, if you have good visibility across across your organization, when those things happen, you can detect those anomalies, right? And make that dwell time, which again is usually from that, again, start to finish, start initial compromise to action and objectives, 5 to 7 months. right? It's a long time. That's your advantage as a defender. So when I tend to get excited and jumping around, but that time in there gives you that is the defender's time. That's your time to be able to make it difficult on the attacker or attacker groups, and there's many of those, right? But again, as a red team guy, once you're in, you have to be very, very quiet, right? If you have good defense, trip one indicator, compromise, and kick you out of the network. And so that's the part I think is important. If you can detect, you can take that initial compromise and then find those things that they're going to do and detect those things in a minute or hour or a day or a week at worst, you're going to win, right? You're still going to have that compromise. It's still going to happen. We know that's going to happen. But if you can plan and execute your defenses quickly, right? So you have to be able to run what we call OODA loops and be able to implement your incident response or your event response quickly to thwart that attacker, frustrate them, raise the cost of the attack to those adversaries to make them go somewhere else. That's going to put you on a better foothold when it comes to having to defend against that. And it's going to get, I don't want to say it's going to get more difficult, but it's going to get harder to track. So there's some legislation that's been coming out in ransomware here in the US about putting, and I don't even know if it's illegal now, and I'm not an attorney, so don't take anything I'm saying is legal advice ever. But they're talking about passing legislation to make it illegal to pay ransomware payments. So think about what that's going to do, right? If you're a business owner, or you're a hospital, or you're a small healthcare facility, you've been ransomed, you don't have your backups, you're not getting it back without paying the ransom, right? And I'm not ever advocating for paying a ransom, but your choice is pay the ransom or go out of business, right? Now they're going to make you a felon for paying that. It's going to make what it's going to do to me, it's going to cause the reporting of ransomware events to go way, way down. So it's going to look like we're solving the problem or not. So we have to be careful of that. And the other thing that happens too, like you talked about in the beginning, is cyber is one of the few crimes that happen that you blame the victim, right? Yeah. So the hospital was the victim of a cyber attack. They were the victim of a crime, and now they're being sued because, and again, it's horrible that anybody should suffer at all because of what happened. But do they have some culpability? Who knows? But they always blame the victim in cyber. It's kind of strange. I think the best thing that people need to do is, again, take the advice of people who study attackers or have been attackers like Tal. Understand where the majority of these things happen, what these majority of these attacks look like, and plan your defenses around that. And you got to be nimble with it. You do need budget, you need people. You can contract that out at times, but that you have to. The days of cyber defense being a luxury are over. Everybody needs good cyber defenses, especially in the medical industry today. So,
no, and you know what, actually, Greg, and talking about dwell time and that whole discussion there, Tal, I'd be curious to get your thoughts, on that from an attacker perspective, right? How, from an attacker perspective, do you kind of increase your dwell time and kind of circumvent these different, technologies that Greg just spoke about?
So, well, it really depends, because as an attacker, I can say that usually when I wear the black hats, and it was very, very very easy for me, to do some social engineering and bypass many devices, and it was for me, like, again, any endpoint was the entry point, but of course the weakest link was probably the secretary or some staff guy that is not really familiar with what's going on. So accessing any network is easy. It's even easier when you are at home, by the way, because you just need to connect to something. You just open your Wi-Fi, you download some link because you think that everything is okay, bam, and you have no idea that someone else is in your network. By the way, it's not only that you have no idea, but also your EDR has no idea that right now someone else is in your network. That is the main problem. Today, the ransom attacks, they take almost no time. If they took like between 6 to 8 months for an attacker to see everything in your network, now it takes them like couple of months maximum to take every piece of information that they need in order to lock you down. And that is something, again, so sad that it happens on the health sector. I mean, yes, I understand when country attacks country, okay, so you go to the federal, you go to other places, but why go to, but why hurt? I mean, like, probably innocent people. I mean, that is something that seriously, even when I wear the black hat when I was younger, when I was teenage, actually, a teenager. So I didn't want to do no harm for people that they don't deserve it, but well, people that deserve it. It is also something funny, but again, I mean, especially not to hospitals. I mean, of course not. I mean, I keep thinking about it, how bizarre it is that it's not. I mean, it's so easy to attack, and that is why we see all over the news, even, I mean, here in Israel, in Europe, in America, the health sector over and over again, because of lack of budget and lack of people and manpower, they get the attacks first, unfortunately, because they have less security, they have less money, and after that, again, I mean, as Greg said, I mean, they even need to pay about it. I mean, they need to pay for it, and why? They pay double. I mean, they are so miserable right now. And to shut down a hospital, for 24 hours, just think about it in terms of, I don't know, like how many surgeries, how many procedures you miss, or some, of course, if you have something SOS that you need to do, you are down, and that is so sad. Again, and brings me to the point that we talk about the same thing over and over again. I mean, how easy it is to get into any network, by the way, especially health network, when it is not really closed. It is pretty open. It's really easy to bypass those networks as well. And when you do not have a sufficient, let's say, security components, or let's say, strong team, or some consultancy, that is something really bad. When you don't have the good hardening, of course, but it's really hard, to keep up with all of those tasks over and over again. And yeah, so that's my thought.
This is an interesting segue. So, Sean, this is you deal with this, on a day-to-day basis, being boots on the ground in the health systems, right? And from a defender perspective, who's directly responsible for the patient information, what are your thoughts in hearing both what Greg and Tal are talking about?
Well, they need to stop doing it. It's that simple. Cut it out. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of when I came into IT in the first place. I was never advanced as either Greg or Tal, but I was a little sit home, trying to figure out what I could get into, what I could see. So, spent a lot of time playing with, different softwares, trying to do things. So I started thinking, as they said, like an attacker. And when I went into Hope, that was my thought process is, okay, what would I do? Now, there's not much I could do about the insider threat, and everybody understands that's always going to be a real risk. You always try to look out for it, but you try to do what you can on the outside. The first thing we tried to do was to reduce our external footprint. When I started, we had RDP servers out there, just a buttload of them. Everybody could get to them. They were getting hammered on nonstop to the point that all of them were getting shut down because there were just so many attacks on them. You couldn't even keep them up. So we first had to get rid of that. I mean, that's very important. If anybody's got RDP out there and you don't have some way to make that go away, find a way to make that go away. It's just not worth the risk. We made sure we put everything behind a VPN. We tried to proxy everything else that we could that had to be facing and put it very much deep inside. I know with Tal's experience, she'd find a way around most of the stuff we do, but you try to obfuscate any piece of equipment. You don't want to label it out there. Hey, this is our SQL server that we hold all of our patient data. Why advertise what you don't have to in case somebody does happen to get in? You're going to try to make it a little bit more difficult for them, or as much as possible. Try to segment your networks off. We had like 18 different locations, and at one point they were all interconnected. You could bounce from one to the other without even thinking about it. So anybody doing recon, it wouldn't take you 2 months. You'd have it done in the matter of a few hours as long as it wasn't detected. So, you get good equipment watching traffic, looking for anomalies. Greg's got some great products that do that and a great company that does that. So anybody listening that wants his services, by all means, please. You try to, again, like I said, you limit the permissions, you try to lock down machines, you try to, anything you can do. It makes it difficult on a support side, but IT can go through a few headaches if they're not chasing down ransomware. That's another big thing is you got to have a very good backup and recovery and disaster recovery program, or at least a process. You have to have it in the case that something goes wrong. You have a way to get it back. If you can get it off your network, don't have anything domain connected, don't have it LDAP connected. You want your backup separate from everything, because there's been numerous times that I know all of you are probably familiar with, where the person was in for a while and was able to get to their backup, so they had no way to recover. You pay, lose your company, those are your choices. And when it comes down to healthcare, that's not much of a choice to make for anybody, because you're trying to deal with people's lives. So
I have a question for you, Sean. Can I ask a question? Can I ask a question, Mario?
Oh, go for it.
Yeah, one of the things I think that I think is probably more, and we deal with a lot of different industries, so I think more prevalent in healthcare is pushback, like executive pushback or physician pushback to security measures. Like, and we all realize that some security measures are until you get used to them, it's a change, and people don't like change. But we have to change things like two-factor authentication, or go on and on of have to whatever the case. But again, losing RDP on the outside, those type of changes that you have to make that may cause executives and physicians to do things a little bit different, that you're going to get pushback from. How do you I'd be curious, but how do you, anybody else that out there, how they deal with that? Do you think people are starting to, those physicians are smart people, are they starting to understand the risk behind that? Is there an easy way to explain to them the risk? We all understand the risk because we've seen it, right? We're there, we're in the trenches every day. To get us a surgeon to understand the risk when he's thinking about, I gotta cut somebody open, right? It's a way different, right? Way different model in their head. So I'm curious about thoughts on that.
Well, you always have pushback. The staff pushback, just the regular old worker ants, they're all going to get upset about something no matter what. I hate to say it that way, but when you go from a 6 character password to an 8 character or to 10 character, they all throw their arms up and they're exasperated. But after a short period of time, that dust settles. When you try to do things that are a little bit more changed than just a couple characters and a password, when you go to the multi-factor or something like that, what you really end up having, at least in my experience in healthcare, is there is a tail that wags the dog. And as much as you like to think it's upper management and they can call the shots, the chief's going to say, I'm too bad, that's how it's going to go. But the tail that wags the dog really is the physicians. That's just in my experience. So if something slows a physician down, even minutely, they get very upset about it, and they know the right people to talk to, and everybody's really hurting for medical staff, and they do not want to lose doctors. So you got to try to walk that line. But a lot of times, if you can find a way to really hit that point home with the what ifs to the right people, you get the buy-in, and that really does handle the rest. And once you get a couple of people, especially, you get the chief financial officer, and let that person know, okay, so if we get hit with this, or you get popped with this is what's going to happen. And they really understand the ramifications and the trickle down of what that does. All of a sudden they start rallying behind you, which then makes it move a little bit better. You still have people upset, but they're willing to make the change and take the growing pains for I hate to say it, but for the greater good. I mean, and that's really what it is making those changes is for the greater good, to protect not only the company, but to protect all the people you're giving care to.
Yeah.
Well, if I
point.
Go ahead. Sorry, Mario. So yeah, it is frustrating. Yeah, I agree. I mean, when the IT and the security teams, when they try to harden and to make or to do something better for the infrastructure, they get many, let's say, they get pushbacks like, no, not today, or and then they want to open to more things like let's go to the cloud, okay? Because cloud, everyone is in the cloud, so do we. I mean, how? Yeah, fun, cloud. And then, unfortunately, the problem with the cloud is that, okay, you go to the cloud and then what? Now you have, your attack surface just increases like in so many ways that if you want to close it, if you want to protect it, then again, you need more manpower, more knowledge that you don't have but what you do is you do because everyone else does. So if they do it, so you do it, but you have no idea about the risk, about everything, and of course the consequences and everything that you do. And that is a major problem. And another thing is, of course, the IT. I think the IT among the hospitals, they most of the time they need to deal with so minor problem. I mean, some people for the help desk, okay? So they are for example, they are engineers and they need to deal with I forgot my password. Oh, just do this. And they don't need to do the tier 1 or tier 0 support because they are way more than that. So that is why you see people sometimes less talented in hospitals, while you find the people that are more talented in other places. So that is another thing that I see it in among this sector when Gytpol is installed. So it's a problem.
One thing that she said, I think is, and I had to laugh about it because it's so true. And it's true in medical, and it's true across every industry we deal with, is that people think, or executives think, that because they're moving to the cloud, that they're transferring their risk, right? That they say, okay, now that risk is not mine, but it's sitting in AWS or it's sitting in Azure. They don't realize is that you're not transferring the risk. The risk is there, and it's actually just went up because now you're utilizing things that maybe your IT teams don't understand. Maybe you don't have visibility into those systems for tracking intrusions and things like that. So the cloud is not the panacea that executives and non-tech people think it is, right? It's convenient, it's there, it's probably not going anywhere, but you're not losing risk by doing that. I've stole terabytes of data out of the cloud, right? So
correct.
It's a very good point, Tal.
Yeah, and I agree also is many times everyone wants to go hosted service. Even at Hope, it's hosted, because of that very reason. They believe that they are passing their responsibility on. Oh, it's a hosted, we have a BAA with them, we're all good. If it's something they get popped, then that's on them, not us. And that's, we've gone through things where one of our others that we had things hosted with, well, they did get hit. So we still have to deal with the fallout from that. If records get stolen, we still have to be the ones that contact. We still have to deal with all that. So even if you may not be financially responsible, you ultimately are still responsible for all those records, all those things. And whether it was your data, you deal with it in motion, at rest, it's your responsibility. There is no passing the buck, no matter what service you use.
So here's an interesting question that came up in this discussion that I heard, right? Like cloud versus on-prem, right? That bunker mentality versus like, okay, let's get to this new generation type of technology. So, and Sean, this is probably more towards you, being a practitioner, right? And you have talked a little bit about how it affected you from a cloud perspective, but is it any easier being on-prem versus the cloud, or is it just as hard, regardless of the fact that the threat vector actually has grown?
Yeah, I think there's trade-offs either way. One of the biggest issues that I see, so there's a weighing that happens. A lot of the IT teams, especially ours, we are not a large IT team, skeleton crew. And the upper management, they think that they're going to throw a whole bunch of technology at things and that's going to solve issues. But as Tal even mentioned, you need to have manpower. No matter what it is, you need to have some manpower to defend the castle. So on-prem is to a point, it's great, but then you have so much you need to maintain, to support, to do all the patching, all the updates. Mistakes are going to be made. So I don't think there's either any correct situation. It's going to probably be hybrid no matter what you do, but it's a very difficult balance on trying to figure out which one's better. I was always against the cloud. I fought it forever until finally I caved because we honestly didn't have the manpower to protect everything we had. So offloading even just some of that stuff elsewhere and maybe catching a little bit of, at least they're doing the patching. We can watch the data moving and lock it down as much as possible. And that gives us a little bit more free time since we don't have such a large amount of equipment that we need to deal with.
And if I can continue this discussion about the cloud, on-prem versus cloud, I do think that on-prem, well, again, the unknown is, let's say, bigger than the known, that what you know in the cloud, because the cloud is every day there is a new vulnerability, a new, I don't say maybe vulnerability, maybe misconfiguration, a new thing that leaves you wide open. And although, okay, in the on-prem, you can somehow control it when you have the same servers, you know what you do, you know what to do. In the cloud, you have so many teams that any team controls another component or application or service principal or IaaS or PaaS or whatever, and you get lost. I don't know if you know how many startups, their whole concept is to deal with the Amazon identity in Amazon. Only the identity in Amazon. But when I say only, the identity is huge. And when you have so many startups dealing with identity of Amazon, then you understand that identity, the IAM, is only one thing. You have the PaaS, you have the IaaS, you have the whatever, everything on as a service. And the more you expose, or the more you expand yourself in the cloud, the more you are exposed. That's for sure. A default setting in the cloud is just let's have an infrastructure in the cloud, like let's create a device, and then the default setting is just to leave the device like RDP open, like anyone can access this device from anywhere. And so again, when you don't see it, so in the on-prem, on the other end, you have the firewall, so you can protect yourself against like the threats from the outside. But it will be even so it's not only on-prem or only cloud. It really depends. If you are 20 men, if you are only a company of 20 people, that is okay. Be on the cloud if you don't have many things to do, again, but be SOC 2 or whatever. If you are a hospital, if you have some legacy software, you'll never be on the cloud. Let's admit it. You'll never be fully cloud.
So, Greg, in hearing Tal and Sean, and taking into account like your red team experience and blue team experience, and kind of creating like this purple team type of like overall experience, what are your thoughts around what you're hearing?
So it's all correct. it's all 100% correct, right? And the thing that, again, so what I think really need to focus on, I think at least what we do, and I'm not trying to be salesy and need to stretch the imagination, but what people need to do is you need to have visibility, right? And that's the problem number one, is no matter where your stuff sits. And today it's part cloud, it's part on-prem, it's work from home. You need, as a security team, you need visibility into that. Because if you get the visibility, then you can start putting in detections and looking for things that happen during attacks, pivoting behaviors and all that kind of stuff. But the second problem that comes into is the manpower problem, right? So I don't think there's any great strides to be made in collecting data, right? Collecting data, everybody does. Everybody says it's special. That's baloney. Everybody collects the same data. You're collecting, either you're collecting network packet data, you're collecting SIM data, you're collecting all this stuff. That's great. You can get that data. It's a lot of noise, right? So it's a lot of, you have to be able to take out the signal from the noise. So increase your signal to noise ratio, get rid of the chaff, and then have talented people that can understand what they're looking at, investigate quickly, and make decisions, right? So, and there also needs to be this, I think, from the blue team side of things, people need to have expectations about what needs to happen. And there's two different schools of thought, I think, when it comes to that part of it. I do a lot of work with law enforcement. Law enforcement's incident response process is very, very different than what I think our incident response process does for our customers. Law enforcement's interested in the preservation of evidence, right? Getting images, doing all that fun stuff, which I'm not saying is not needed. But the likelihood, if you have a likelihood of you attributing a ransomware attack to an individual, is slim to none. And the likelihood of that individual, if you do that, being prosecuted or extradited to the United States is even slimmer to none, or even Israel, right? So being extradited, any kind of I-5 nation. So it's not going to happen. So putting time into that, I think is there are times that needs to happen, insider threats, things like that. But you really need to focus your response process on acting quickly. Observe, orient, decide, act type, OODA loop type situations where, again, you have people who can do that. But again, it comes down to people. You need people. You need eyes on that data and people who can understand it. And that's the problem. It's complex, and it's not going to get any less complex over time, no matter how, no matter what your situation is. But you have to, companies need to understand they need to have people watching your cyber defenses, or else, again, they're going to put, Tal said something that she said it kind of quickly, but it's worth noting. I'm going to bypass your EDR, right? I'm going to bypass your antivirus. I'm going to bypass these things, and you probably won't know it. Why won't you know it? Because you're not watching, or you don't have anybody watching, right? And most people don't, and that's the problem. When you look at some of the ransomware attacks, there's papers and they show attack chains of what is done during these attacks, kind of this post-mortem of several different groups. Twisted Spider, well, there's always some spider thing. That's a CrowdStrike thing, I think, of marketing stuff. But all these different ransomware campaigns, I would say, looking at what they did, there's always something that's detectable on there, but it's only detectable if you're looking for it. That's the problem, I think, and that's a people problem. So,
well, this is actually, there's one thing that me personally, I've always thought about in this whole part of this discussion, and I had a feeling it would come up, which we've heard it multiple times, right? Which is talent, right? The talent to find, the talent to seek, the talent to know, right? And now these ransomware organizations are becoming very much like legitimate business enterprise type thought processes, right? Where now, they're providing as a service capabilities, right? Credential harvesting, phishing, ransomware, right? And then on top of that, I've read multiple articles recently where they are now actually recruiting talent via like legitimate postings, right? Career Builder and Monster and these things that we think is legitimate, but they're using these tools. So, from that perspective, if there's a one takeaway, what would it be from this talent conversation?
I can jump in real quick on that. So, truthfully, what people need to realize, especially when the bad guys are smart too, and that's from a Stranger Things movie, right? So, but realize they are, and it's usually not the same bad guy from start to finish, right? So you usually have a group that's doing the reconnaissance. You have groups that do that initial compromise. You have groups who are going to do these are the smart guys, the guys that get in and keep the persistence. And these guys are sysadmins. They understand Active Directory. They know how to use your Active Directory against. They understand PowerShell. They understand how MSP platforms work. They understand how the cloud works. I mean, they understand how to get in and look for these things, because if they leave an avenue uncovered or not covered, and you can recover from that attack, then it doesn't do them any good, right? They just wasted a whole bunch of time because you're not going to pay. So you have to realize that you're up against smart people, right? And so I don't think it's feasible for most small organizations, medium-sized organizations, I would even include Hope in that, to try to hire their dedicated SOC team, right? And that's the whole reason why we started BlueShift was, if we could put in inexpensive platforms to collect the data, right? Great algorithms around how to change the signal to noise ratio, and then have talented people behind that, which is where the real value is, watching that on a consistent basis. We can make a difference in detecting and responding to any adversary, regardless of where they're at in the attack chain. So I think that's going to be probably the future. It's hard to recruit cyber people, right? Cyber people want to go work for CrowdStrike. They want to, even for us, it's hard. I mean, we're a startup and it's fun and all that fun stuff, but trying to recruit cyber people is tough. Trying to recruit experienced cyber people. So Tal is much younger than me, but she has great experience, right? So finding what I call seasoned cyber people is not easy at all, right? You can get someone out of school with a certificate and train them, but then how long are they going to stay around? So it's just like this is kind of like MSP 2.0, MSSP 2.0 too right now, where I think the market's going to shift to organizations that can provide those services to at scale to companies that can't afford to stand up their own SOC services. So.
And you know what, Greg and Adam, you just chatted this in the box, and I think it's really resonating kind of with what Greg is saying, which is Adam's pretty much saying that there isn't talent in CISOs in Australia or New Zealand, right? And these guys are sysadmins, and the talented ones are just rare, right? And I think this is another issue. And you sometimes see this even within the United States, right? Where the talented ones that do, are they going to stick around? To your point, Greg, with the right training, they might not.
Well, take a look at the government here in the government,
Yeah.
I should say. Like, so you look at like the FBI. You know, anybody who goes through FBI cyber, the FBI doesn't have turnover, or the Federal Bureau of Investigation, except for in cyber, because what do people do? They go there, they get trained up, and then they're snapped up in the commercial market for twice the salary of what they were making at the FBI. So law enforcement's at a disadvantage because they're not getting the best talent. Same thing with the U.S. government is the same thing. They're not getting the best talent. Now we have some really talented guys in our U.S. Cyber Command and SOCOM, our military arm of cyber. There are some very talented people in those branches. But just like any commercial organization, the best people already have jobs.
Yeah.
Right. So when you're trying to recruit, it makes it difficult.
Yeah. And Sean, in this discussion, it kind of reminds me of what you were saying earlier, how you're a skeleton shop, and finding that talent, to figure out these things can be quite challenging.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one thing, I hate to say it, one thing that came to me is I had to admit, as difficult as it was, there are always going to be people smarter than me. So what that means is I had to tuck tail it sometimes and say, look, I need help with this. There are people that are smarter. There are people better who know more than me. And you have to really come to terms with what your limits are, not only with your personal knowledge, with your team's knowledge, with what you have going. Sometimes you got to reach out to help with companies like with Greg's. You can only do so much with eyes on it. You need that extra little help. Somebody saying, hey, you got something crazy going on here. We don't understand this traffic. And that gives you at least a jumping point than, saying you've got 5-6 people on your team and you're trying to watch 3,000 endpoints. I mean, it's really not feasible to watch all that data and do all the work you got to do to keep the company running. So, I mean, you do have to know your limits. And if you don't know your limits and you're a little bit arrogant, you're going to get popped sooner than later.
Yep.
But one last sentence. I mean, it's not only. I mean, when it is hard to have let's say freshing hands on my keyboard or joining my team, but it is hard not only for hospitals, also for my company. I mean, we are trying very hard to find the good people. So it's not only on hospitals. Yeah, on hospitals they have their own difficulties, but also among any other companies. I mean, today you can see even Facebook, Google, Amazon, everyone is trying to look for the most talented people, but unfortunately, not everyone gets to do it. I mean, it's not every choice of it's not every, let's say, people not every person that we raise.
Yep. So, in interest of time, we are kind of at our time now. What are some, quick closing remarks? Let's start with Greg.
That's a hard thing to do because, cyber is never ending, right? You should never, ever stop talking about cyber. It's always going to change. There's always going to be a threat out there. I think it's important that, I'm happy and sad at the same time. 6-7 years ago, trying to get the attention of the board of a company or the executives of a company to spend money on security was laughable, right? And I wouldn't say maybe even a little bit longer than that. And now that the predictions have come to bear, and everything, like I'm sure Tal and Sean and myself have been saying it for years of what's going to happen has come to bear. It's finally companies are starting to understand they have to have budget and they have to have leadership that understands cyber. I think the budget for cyber, they need leadership that understands cyber. That's good. That's going to help us. We need to do it faster, right? We need a quicker uptake on this, because the longer companies wait, the more victims there's going to be. So that companies really need to get a faster uptake on it. We need to start taking it very, very seriously. They need to figure out what's the best strategy for them, right? So there's great consulting groups like yours who can come out and help them understand what's the best strategy. It's going to be different for every company. You know, not everything's a fit for every company. But get the right strategy that's going to work for you and your budget, right? And move forward. So we need to raise this is always going to be a cat and mouse game. It's not going anywhere, right? We're raising our standards like we have been in the past few years. We're doing very, very, I think we've made huge, great leaps and bounds towards it. But last year was the most ransomware attacks and the most 0 days ever, even though we had the most technology and the most investment in the cyber. Everybody's bar is raising. So we got to, in order to beat the bad guys, we have to just keep at it, get the budget, get things in, and hopefully we can, we may lose a few battles, but hopefully we can win the war.
Oh, love it. Tal, closing thoughts.
Yeah, so my 2 cents are that not only, I mean, if I can following and continue what Greg just finished, not only that, but again, if the other companies, the other vendors will lower their prices, I mean, again, for hospitals, because we are not doing this to make sure that right now we are going to be rich because of hospitals. No, we just want to help them. We want to help them, let's say, survive and even to save other people's lives. So yeah, I do think it is really important to maintain all of those, but also to make sure that you don't want to, I mean, you don't want to, I don't know, like to be rich from some poor hospital that has nothing in his pocket and everything that he has, he pays for you. So yeah, I mean, definitely just, help them save. I mean, today is maybe no one, but tomorrow can be your family or your friends over there. And then you will be upset that, oh, I can't believe that I didn't discount them in another 80% or whatever. I mean, so that's what I think.
Yep. Sean, closing remarks from the healthcare side?
Well, as they said, it is a cat and mouse. It's no different than the radar gun and the radar detector. It was always the cat and mouse game. It's not, as Greg said, not going away. In healthcare or with any industry, really, pinching pennies on cyber, I think those days need to go away. I understand being frugal and being smart with your money, but you got to find different places to pinch pennies. And I think it's gotten a lot better than it used to be, but the network out there of information sharing has grown tremendously, which is really helping a lot of us try to thwart the attacks. When before you were just out there shooting in the dark, you didn't know what was going on. So that major sharing of information is going to go a long way to helping people educate, helping to stop, helping to develop plans to correct these things. That's my biggest point, is just keep sharing the information and keep educating, and maybe we'll come close to even on the battle.
Well, with that said, I want to thank everyone, including our panelists, for being here and listening to our webinar. We appreciate you being here. If you have any questions, comments, or just want to keep in touch, please follow us on Twitter at LLC Knowledge, and follow us on LinkedIn by searching Nolij Consulting. Thanks again for joining us today, and we will see you next time as we continue our Future of Health webinar series.